This podcast is brought to you by the Center for Educational Innovation. Since 1989, the CEI has helped shift school systems towards authentic, from-the-ground-up improvement, turning under-resourced schools into engines of opportunity and impact. TeacherGuard thanks you for your proud sponsorship and support. Teaching is hard, and oftentimes it isn't what happens in the classroom that makes the job difficult. It's what happens before and after school, during passing periods, at lunch, in meetings, or in our lives outside of school that challenges our ability to stick with the profession. TeacherGuard is committed to focusing on making teaching sustainable and enjoyable. We want to make the rewards of the profession seem more attainable and the challenges more bearable. Our mentorship model pairs teachers with consistent daily support from a peer educator. Through TeacherGuard's 4 sustainability principles, we will walk the challenging times with you and allow you to enjoy the wins and celebrations that come with this beautiful profession. See teacherguard.net for more information and to explore how you can join our community of educators today. We hope you enjoy today's podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the TeacherGuard podcast. Joining me today, Camden, how are you doing today?
Great, Adam. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you for giving me a little of your time. Let's start off just by having you introduce yourself. What do you do now? What did you do in the past? What is your teaching experience? Anything you want to share about you and your career?
Yeah. Well, I'm Camden Hanzlick-Burton. I'm currently in Kansas City, on the Kansas side, for those of you who know that there's a state on both sides. I'm originally from here, although I have taught in both Kansas City metro area as well as in Seattle, so that's sort of part of my journey is I went to school in Kansas City and then taught for a couple years in a suburban large public high school in Kansas City, and then moved out to Seattle after my 3rd year teaching. I had the opportunity to open and teach in a small public charter school, and that was really incredible for me, just in my teaching journey. So was able to teach there for a while, and then moved into graduate our first graduating class, which was really cool to get to go through our school is maybe a little different for folks who had been in schools before. When in Kansas City, we had a brand new high school that opened, and they start with a full 9 through 12, or, there's someone in every grade. Whereas at this school in Seattle, we just start with 9th grade, and then they slowly graduated up, which was really cool to watch. And then moved into the district level, working in professional development, leadership support. And then now I work at a nonprofit. It's still in education, and work with, originally with like school support, and now in professional learning around technology, and the roles of technology in teaching.
So a lot of variety in your experience in your career so far. So you've seen teaching from multiple different lenses, right? Working in what you may call a traditional setting, working in a charter setting, working at a district level, and now for a nonprofit. Based on either your own experience or what you've seen in colleagues, other teachers, or maybe through some of your leadership work, what would you say is 1, maybe 2 factors that you believe are the biggest challenges for staying in the teaching profession, whether that's teaching in the classroom or just staying in education, period?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at least somewhat of an example of that, of not currently being in the classroom. I know for me, some of that was, initially timing of transitioning, moving back. So I was in Seattle and then moved back to Kansas City during COVID. And so at that time, like having a virtual remote opportunity was just sort of like what made sense. But I know for me, a thing I often say, because I get the question a lot, is what do I miss about being in the classroom? And the thing I always say, and it feels honest to me, is that I miss kids. I don't miss all of the other things that often came with teaching. And for me, what that meant was like, I was teaching like 3 classes, or had after school opportunities of clubs or whatnot. And, you know, PD meetings, staff meetings, lesson planning, grading, emails, you know, that kind of stuff was the things that we had to do on top of just like being in a room full of students. And I loved like, even on the worst days, like I loved every interaction I had with student. It was just all the other things, you know, sort of like took the energy out. Um, yeah.
So in terms of all those other things, right? Oftentimes I just actually spoke with someone else on another episode, and we spoke about just the volume of tasks that a teacher needs to complete on a daily basis. Both that are like individual grading, lesson planning, all that, but then also related to working with other people, right? Whether that's sitting in department meetings, whether that's sitting in all staff meetings, and all of that consumes time. And so when you talk about how everything around the teaching is what makes it challenging to stay in the profession, for as long as you stayed in the classroom, what were some ways that maybe you dealt with that, with just adjusting to the volume of tasks that you had to complete?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing where right now I ended up last year getting a certification in project management. And the reason I bring that up is there's so much of being a teacher that is just, like you said, task management.
Mm-hmm.
And I think not that I don't think this is required, but many successful teachers were strong task managers, not just for like how you run your classroom. I was certainly not someone who was like, this has to happen, this must. Um, but that it's a way to just like keep all of that organized in a way that felt like that stuff didn't weigh you down. Um, and, for me, I think like a way that worked for me was also just setting my priorities of, that kept me in the classroom, like in around some of those things was what am I going to, what do I want to do well? And like, where am I going to put my time and energy? And what are the things I'm okay with not doing at the level that someone else might?
Hmm.
And I say that because like we know the stories of like superhuman teachers and folks who give all their time. And like some of the people I've seen as like the superheroes are also the people who I think had some of the most unsustainable work-life balances. And I don't mean that because I certainly was not a good role model for that at different times in my career. Of I think some of the things that made me successful early on were, or made me feel like I was doing a great job, were also at the exact same time me not taking good care of myself in that regard. And so some of the things, as I realized, like towards the my last couple of years teaching, like one thing I did is I said, I'm not grading anything outside the classroom short of like a lab report, like a big thing that I'm having them turn in. And what that looked like for me is I rethought like feedback was a big deal for me. I wanted students to get feedback directly from me. I wanted them to get it as soon as possible. The research of just more immediate the feedback, the better. And I knew that wasn't helping my life outside of school to try to give students feedback. That, the whole grade rat race was something else too, of like students not completing tasks for the grade rather than like the feedback or the learning. And so one of the things I did and redesigned around my classroom was at every day in class, like I knew what it would mean for a student to be successful. And that was what I was looking for, whether it was, can you answer this simple question about maybe like the core knowledge of that day? Or, I was in a project-based school. So like something that will tell me you're successful today is if I can see that you've made it like this far into the project, or you have like a research question, right? And then I knew like that was what I was looking for as a teacher that day. And so every single student I went around to every day. And yes, that also meant like I was pretty frequently like running around all day with the students and like making sure that I had talked to every single student or every group. But it also made me really aware of what students knew and didn't know, or what they could and couldn't do. And also meant I just didn't go home with that. But that was like a decision I made around what did I prioritize and then how did I want to make that more sustainable. So that really helped me
Well, and I think back to one of the biggest things that I tried learning when I first started teaching. Um, I realized that I needed to learn on my own because I was trying to teach it to the students, and that was time management. And it occurred to me that it is possible that if we don't learn all these strategies as children in school, then
Yeah.
when do you really learn it, right? Like you go to college and you
Yeah.
get your degree in whatever you study, and then you get your teaching credential. All of a sudden, nobody told you, like, hey, this is how you lay out uh, tasks on a calendar to make sure that you're assigning a time and a day to everything, and you can shift it if it needs to get shifted without you feeling like you're dying with checklist overload and sticky notes all over the place. And I do believe that that challenge that you brought up, the idea of the volume of work, can be mitigated if we all kind of treated ourselves, while we're teachers, also treated ourselves as project managers of our own work at the same
Hmm.
time. And that extends beyond work, right? I do think that a lot, or I'm curious what you think about, is a reason for why maybe teachers leave, not necessarily just the volume of work at school, but the volume of tasks in life. That, like, you get
Oh,
home
yeah.
and laundry's piling up. You get home and all these other things are like adding up because that project management is not there both at work or at home. What are your thoughts about that?
Uh, yeah, I mean, like, of course, and I know you well enough to know, like, there are so many things on a teacher's plate that, like, would help just to not be there, right? And, like, some of the ways that I found it to become a little more sustainable was, like, having a better sense of how I manage my time. Um, yeah, I mean, outside of, like, my partner would attest, I have a family calendar and
Yeah.
that thing like runs my life. If it's not on the calendar, it might as well never be a thing we do. And like that, like, yeah, that was like a huge thing for me. And part of that too, from a sustainability standpoint, was not just like, how do I manage all of the stuff and get it put on paper, but it also helped me protect the things that I thought were important too. So outside of teaching, like, Fridays were never for school, right? So like, I made a point of not putting any like work for me to do on a Friday. But also, when I was teaching, I loved going to trivia. I know, probably look exactly like somebody who would love doing trivia. I'll roast myself on that. And like, I did that our trivia night always changed, but like, it's like Monday or Tuesday night. And that was just, something where like that was on the calendar, right? So like that also like helped protect, like, I'm going to do something that I enjoy personally, even outside of teaching. And it also helped me connect to, for me, like connecting to others, right? Because being a teacher it's such a school is such a fascinating environment in that you are surrounded by people all day. And yet it is also an incredibly isolating profession at times because you are the only adult in the room often. Um, so yeah, that also helped me too, was helping me like balance the work and professional by making sure I was like bringing the things that I wanted to be doing into some of that like task management.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a lot of mentorship conversations that we have with teachers, that comes up all the time, right? We don't even ask at the beginning, like, what is it at work that's overwhelming you? We start with like what's happening in the evenings, early mornings, and weekends, because that is the time where teachers can recharge battery and get ready to kind of face everything they're going to face during the workday with a different disposition. Because I think the how we go into the workday is going to affect how everything, how we react to everything, right? And I'm curious about, you mentioned having experience within a charter school, and it sounded like a really unique experience, kind of walking an entire graduation class from being freshmen to seniors, if I understood correctly. Um, did you find that in that environment, and I ask because all of my experience has primarily been in the charter world,
Hmm.
but in speaking with folks that don't live in that world, while the tasks are uh, different in many ways from a charter to a non-charter school, I have found that there is a lot of more flexibility in the charter system. And I do think that I'm not going to make generalities, but I do speak to a lot of teachers that are happier in some respects when it comes to sustainability in the charter world compared to not. So I'm curious about your experience there.
Yeah, I mean, what initially drove me to that charter was, and this kind of goes to like some of the like tension I've had, and I mean, you saw, and even just sharing like my route to like where I am is that, this like saying no part of being a teacher is, a big one. And I think for me is, I don't mean this to sound as like cliche or like LinkedIn jargon as it is, but like saying yes to the right things. And that comes from trial and error. Like I did not just know it when I started teaching at 23, like this is what I should say yes or no to. But it also like, I did that all the way around is I said yes to like opening the school because where I had been at, um, I was teaching 3 preps, uh, and one of those preps was basically like kind of like the credit recovery science class, which also meant like I taught a very different student population than the school at large. It was a pretty affluent school, only 5% free and reduced lunch. Um, and yet in that like credit recovery class, it was a very different like set of students who had failed their first, second, third years of science, and they needed this in order to walk and graduate. Um, and so for me, it was one of those that like also unlocked a bit of, I had gone into teaching because I really cared about science and then teaching science. And then that was like my first step into like, actually, what drew me to this profession is more now, or what's keeping me in this profession is like the kids, and specifically like the students who had not had all the opportunities, or had maybe been left behind in a lot of other ways. So moving to that school is an opportunity to work with a different student population that I really cared about. Uh, so for me, like to get to what you're saying is moving that charter included a lot more things that were more unsustainable in some ways, right? Like in some ways, my hours increased because I had more staff meetings afterwards, but those staff meetings were like, we are meeting to plan for this like 10% of our like students who are most at risk of like are like struggling the most in our school, right? So like for me, like I wanted to spend that extra hour to like work with that, like to work and think with my peers around how we support these students best. While also being careful to say, being in a school where that is not requiring extra amounts of your time is not like a bad thing. I don't want to encourage like teachers of like, you're not doing enough if you don't spend extra time, right? That's like the constant tension. And I do think our school systems can think better themselves too around how we use our time. But for me, that was like parts of it is it was way more fulfilling to me, although there were other things I was giving more up towards. And I think to your point about like charters, I worked at a small charter. So for me, I've seen that, especially in my role now of charters do tend to have some more flexibility around the ways they get at student results. But I've also seen some of that is just like a sheer size of the district. I've seen some like rural districts that actually move pretty flexibly, just like a charter I've been in, because they are just smaller, right? You're navigating a sailboat rather than like trying to turn an ocean liner.
Yeah. Yeah, but you bring up a really good point when it comes to your desire to want to spend that extra time in a meeting, right? Because tying this again back to when we're talking about the volume of work, volume of tasks, right? That volume can also be a problem if it's a small volume, but the tasks are really meaningless that teachers are forced or asked to complete. Right? If maybe they are not asked to stay after school very often, but when they are in school, a lot of the conversations that take place are either not student focused or not driven in a way that is engaging for staff. That can seem longer than if you're asked to stay
Yeah.
a longer amount of time, right? Because you're kind of dreading it. So,
Yeah.
to
I
your,
mean, to that point, like I'm with in case of one, but I stayed longer in that charter network because I found the work more fulfilling and the students I was working with, um, just like that, that drew me to it. And that's what kept me there. Even though like the like on the clock hours at my, like the larger suburban school that I was at previously were way more manageable, at least from just like a sheer time on the clock kind of standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I've learned over time because I think for a really long time I had a really kind of cynical approach to the idea of feeling like your job needs to fulfill you. In my opinion, like we're getting paid to work, right? That is my reward for the effort that I'm putting in. If on top of that I am feeling great about the work that I'm putting in, then fantastic. And if I'm doing something good, but over time, not necessarily that my thinking has shifted, but I've come to be a little more understanding of folks who do feel like if I'm not getting any fulfillment out of what I'm doing, regardless of how much I'm getting paid, um, I'm leaving. And I've seen people leave for lower paying jobs to like earn that fulfillment, and I cannot
Yeah,
grasp that. You
it's so
know?
interesting because I feel like we've landed at a similar spot from kind of the opposite direction. I think for a while I was like, and I think this is a problem. I say a problem, like a teachers have kind of like the nurse's problem, which is like, you don't do it for the money, you do it for like the
Yeah.
patient or the student, right? And like that is a problematic way to think about like, and also you should be compensated. But I definitely agree with you that I have come more around to this idea of sustainability is, I think for me, especially having lost the classroom, I've certainly struggled at times with like, what is my identity as an educator? Um, and some of that sustainable, like I've given up a thing I really cared about, which was working directly with students. And some of the things I've gained back are like my energy to like lead both like a personal life outside of school is that I just have more time for, but also I can give that energy to other things that I do care about that
Hmm.
do still work with potentially like students or people in my community, but in a very different way. And I think that that shifts, right? Like 23-year-old me talking to me now we probably would not agree on that.
Yeah. Well, and it's perspective, right? I think a lot of
Yeah.
people who leave the classroom and then still work with teachers, and whether it's a coaching capacity, any kind of capacity in which you're providing some kind of advice,
Yeah.
um, oftentimes the response is, well, why would I listen to you? You left the classroom, right? You're not a practitioner anymore.
Hmm.
Um, and I almost feel like that's a big problem because then it's almost like the words, the experience, the work of folks who aren't actively teaching is almost like invalidated at
Yeah.
that point, right? And I don't know, that is something that I struggle with a lot because I see great people who have good ideas, and then I see the response from teachers being like, well, come and do it, right? Come and do it with my kids. Come and do it in my classroom, and then, you know, tell me
Yeah.
that you have the time to do that.
It is such a interesting, just like it's, you know, it's such a deeply personal profession of teaching that group. The group of students you have is never quite like any other group, right?
Hmm.
Even year to year when you're in the same school with the roughly the same communities, right? It changes every year and every group of kids have their own personality and context. It is hard. Working with a lot of teachers, especially professional learning and what has been nice of having the perspective between two very starkly different contexts is like another cliche of a lot of good teaching works at a lot of places.
Hmm.
And yeah, I hope that doesn't get lost. Like I do really respect the folks and I've heard it kindly and I've heard it unkindly of the like, you're not doing this anymore. And like that's true. I don't know what it's like right now in your environment. And even if I was teaching, I wouldn't know exactly what it's like where you are. But I also know, like, I think what's interesting as a teacher is like, we're very good at stealing. And I mean that like complimentary, like a lot of teaching is like picking things from other places and like making it work for yourself. And I do hope that, like your podcast does, I do think these narratives are really, like, I find them really interesting to consider what is the insights from this? What are the nuggets from this conversation what would that look like with my students in my context?
Yeah, and I think about that a lot, right? Like, what are ways in which folks who maybe are not in the classroom can still get a message across? Because the irony is that when you're in the classroom, you don't have time to reflect necessarily,
Yes.
right? You don't have time to think thoroughly about, like, this is a good idea, or, oh, this would be really cool to share with someone. When you're not in the classroom, and either it's your full-time job to do that, or you're affiliated with education in some way that allows you that reflection time, then your perspective is invalidated because you're not in the classroom. So when you have the most time
Yeah.
to think and reflect is when people are less inclined to listen to you. And that's where I think the power of stories is huge, right? Whether it's a journal like Kaleidoscope from Knowles, or whether it's going to a conference and not necessarily seeing or listening to the presentation, but maybe just doing a group discussion and hearing people's stories. Lessons, I think, can get transmitted through stories in a less blatant, direct, and maybe preachy way that lands with more people. And I'm curious what you think about that, because that is really the heart of this podcast. My goal is that, folks can choose to listen to this or not and take something from it or not. But it isn't any one of us who are recording, who are, saying, here, you're going to listen to me and this is
Yeah.
what I think you should do, you know?
It's so interesting that this kind of reminds me of something one of my favorite assistant principals ever said, which was like, we're having a conversation at the school around, some disagreements behind what did leadership expect us to do in a situation versus what some of the group of teachers wanted. And, some of that, like, to this idea of not having that time as a teacher and like, what does it mean to listen to other narratives is like, what really opened my mind was any role someone has at a school, and I would say explode this to any role anyone has anywhere, could be done by a lot of people. It's really like we create these roles so that we can function as like a unit. So
Mm-hmm.
like a school, and I say this with like heavy caveats of like, they would not be immediately successful, but you could probably pull most teachers out and give them experience and training, and they could then go become a teacher of another subject, a principal, an admin assistant, like whatever that looks like. It's not the like, because I think sometimes people come at this as like, you don't know what it's like, or you don't have my experience. Like, it's that we are all functioning as like in a way to serve one thing. And if we could put aside the like who can and can't do something, we talk about what is the role, that I have to serve in this like bigger system. And what I appreciate about this, like hearing from narratives, is like when I've gained that perspective, it's not what is this person missing? It's like, what does this mean for me where I am today? And I felt like that has been really helpful to help, sort of let go of this feeling of, well, what don't they know about my students or my environment or my context? And rather just like, what are the ways that this whole thing could function better, or the things I can choose that will fit for me in my role? Because not everything's going to fit. And sometimes the thing you hear 5 years ago won't connect until 5 years later.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you finished on that sentence, because that's the point that I wanted to make, this idea of timing, right? I think the reason why much PD fails is because it's not necessarily align with when a teacher needs to hear that information. And so the beauty of stories, of narratives, is that you may be talking about someone's experience, you may just be having a general conversation about it, and there may be a point that you want to get across, but it could be that someone listens to that when they want to, and then they get something completely different out of it. And maybe it wasn't what you wanted to get across, but the point is that at least it's almost like there's illusion of like I figured it out on my own, right? I heard this story, I heard this conversation, I read this book, um, but I came to this conclusion, and we are all at the end of the day. I think no matter how small each of our egos are, if we feel like we figured something out, we're going to be more inclined to do it than if we feel like somebody else told us to do it or told us that that's the best thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it is like this idea of like when I was like working with instructional coaching, like and especially as a teacher too, like as hard as it is sometimes to fight, like this idea of like cognitive coaching of like folks have to make sense of their world, of their role and their place in it on their own. And like we can be there to help them put the pieces on a table and to help create experiences for them to figure that out. But like we won't, and I do feel like that is the role of a leader, of a teacher, is like giving people those opportunities and giving it to them multiple times because it's not going to always work at the right time. I mean, I know when I was a new teacher, I had an instructional coach who we worked on the same thing. I mean, like it was something as simple as like positive framing for like narration. And she probably coached me on it for, I'm embarrassed to say, maybe months. And like when it clicked, it clicked. But it wouldn't have worked if she had just said, this is how you have to do it. Cause it never would have meant anything to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's all about timing, right? Like I learned about the science practices pretty early in my career, and I probably had to hear the same thing about them multiple times, multiple years apart for it to finally click one day and think like, oh, okay, like this is what it means to embed a practice and alignment with a standard in my lesson sequence. Um, and again, even when you feel like you figure it out the first time, it's really just going through that motion, through the motions until you internalize exactly what that means. And now it's what we think about in teaching. Are we just asking students to memorize, or are we asking to truly practice and implement? I think it's the same thing for educators with anything that, is an instructional strategy or anything else we want them to do.
I'm 100%. There are so many parallels that teaching. We are not doing any. This sounds negative, and it's not meant to be. Like we don't do anything in teaching that does not really apply to just how people go through the world on their own. Back to your whole thing of like time management. Like I didn't learn that as a student. It actually helps students a lot to be able to set goals and think about how they're going to accomplish them. No one ever told me how to do that as a kid. I wish I had.
Yeah. Well, and here's what's interesting about that, right? Like teachers are learning some of these things. Teachers are also students in many ways, but so are administrators.
Yeah.
Administrators oftentimes, if not almost always, were teachers who all of a
Yeah.
sudden are now managers without having gone through management training ever. And so the people
Yeah.
who teachers believe are supposed to have all the answers are going through this learning process themselves and going through these emotions themselves all the time. And I think that that's a big source of frustration all the time because we don't all recognize that we are all learners in whatever role we have.
I really love that, Adam. I think there's so much and I felt this as a teacher. I've felt this as a leader, both in informal and like formal spaces of, like the imposter syndrome of there's often just such expectation that you need to know what you're doing all the time. And I think some of that is like, right, like the society we live in where we're expected to we got to go, right? And teaching is like this, right? There's no warm up period. There's no internship. You get maybe 6 months of student teaching, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then that's it. And you did it at like 20 years old and then you just got to go.
Yep.
And yeah, we don't expect that from our students, but we expect it from ourselves.
Right.
And yeah, I do think leaders, principals, teachers, department chairs, just like that grace, but also the vulnerability to, I think, also be transparent with people of, we will figure this out, but also like, I don't have all the answers. And that's not a bad thing to not have them. That's a realistic way to operate.
Yeah, and I brought this up on another podcast a few weeks ago, but I think what our society rewards is not just having the correct answer, but having it very quickly. And thinking about like chess competitions, right? Like chess should really be a game where like you're thoroughly thinking about your next move. And yet
Yes.
here in the United States, we reward those who can think correctly about the next move in the shortest amount of time possible. And then I think that translates to everything in education, right? Like administrators probably feel the pressure of I gotta find the answer and know it quickly. And if I don't, I gotta at least know what to say to pacify the situation immediately. Teachers feel the pressure of I gotta figure out classroom management quickly before somebody steps in and sees that I'm terrible at it. You know, it's that speed that I think is problematic.
Well, and is speed also for like the people who need to go slow the most? Um,
Yeah.
my, I live in Kansas City. I'm a fan of the Kansas City Royals, which is a bad baseball team, objectively. And I feel like it is often, I've seen a lot of people get fired because they're not good. And then the next person doesn't make them good because it's
Yep.
like, hey, they weren't good.
Right.
And I see that a lot in schools. Like the schools, the leaders who need the most time to develop are often in some of the toughest, most undersourced resource environments, and they get the least amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we do is then we are incentivized to move quickly without intention because that's the only thing that gets rewarded in those environments.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a fan of the Raiders, and they
Okay, so you know,
cycle through coaches and
yeah,
general managers like no other, right?
yeah,
And then we wonder why it's been a quarter of a century since we were good. It's because of that, right? Like we're
yeah.
not giving
It
anybody
actually
time.
wasn't the people in charge, or it wasn't the people that you hired to figure it out. Sometimes it was, but it's the system you created
It's the
where,
system,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, Really enjoyed this conversation. I like to finish up all these episodes by just asking folks if you were in a room with a teacher who's really overwhelmed at the end of the school year, maybe first or second year, and is considering leaving the profession, what are a couple things that you may ask, say to them, not even necessarily to discourage them from making that decision, but to maybe prompt some thinking on their part, additional thinking, before making a pretty big life-changing decision?
Yeah. I, I think I'll say, Adam, I feel like some of the questions you asked me here are what I've had this conversation with many teachers. And I think part of that is sometimes because of the career trajectory I had of leaving the classroom. Folks will ask, so what did that look like? And for me, it was like you asked earlier, what got you there and why are you still in it? And knowing that those can change. I think sometimes I've seen sometimes for the folks who do end up staying, even when they have those questions, like, hey, questioning is reasonable. It's a tough job. And also sometimes it came from being honest with the things that you wanted and the things that you're getting out of the job changed. I think sometimes the reason we went into it has now, like, we have different things keeping us there, but we never like really, like you said, we're always moving so fast. We didn't take the time to acknowledge that. Um, and the thing, this is now not a question, but the thing I've said to many folks is like every kid, and I mean this earnestly, like if you have the energy, like I do believe strongly in like working with our students who um, need our best teachers, but also every kid needs a great teacher. And so sometimes for some folks, it was like in the charter world I was in is I still have a passion for teaching, but I'm running myself ragged. And like, if the answer is just getting perspective in a different environment, sometimes that helped. Not I'm advocating everybody should just jump ship and see how that goes. Cause then there's a lot of other things that'll come with that. But uh, yeah, what, what got you there? Why are you still there?
Yeah. That's perfect. And sustainability doesn't mean you are consistently in the same position for your entire career. Sustainability just means that you are happy and that you are in education for as long as possible,
And
while being
one
happy.
that remind me of one other thing, Adam, I'll say is just like my appreciation. One thing I did reflect a lot about in teaching was what makes me happy versus what do I feel content with.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think there was this sense of like, I felt like I should have been happy every single day I was teaching. And then what sort of actually changed for me was like, what does contentment mean to me? Because happy is like, there's such a high bar of like joy. And not to say that, I mean, just, as teachers, there are some days where there's just not joy,
Yep.
right? Or it's hard to find. But what is bringing you, what is making you feel content in this world? And sometimes the answer is like, what, I do feel content in my job, even if I am frustrated from day to day, because that's going to happen everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and happiness, contentment, right? That only exists when you have something to contrast it with. So the key
Absolutely.
is not to necessarily just chase being happy all the time. It's also like, how do you deal with the opposite emotions and how do
Yes.
you overcome those ups and downs? So,
That's a great point. I do think that sometimes that's also the reflection too, is it's the biggest thing we spend most of our day on is where we work. And so it seems like the easiest thing to change, but often there are times when people will change that and find out that was not the thing that was actually making them, affecting their mental health or whatnot.
absolutely. Well, Camden, thank you again for the time that you've given me. Really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit earlier this year and really enjoyed our conversation. I'd love to have you back on again in the future.
Likewise, Adam, this was great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it and found it helpful to your teaching journey, please don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube or through your favorite podcast platform. We also appreciate any and all reviews or comments you leave. Thank you for joining us today and tune in next week for our next episode.